It's 10 times the terror.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror.
Not okay.
All right, should we clear our throats? It's 10 times the terror. Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. My name is James.
And I'm Paul.
And I'm Gwen.
And on today's episode, we are going straight into the multiverse. That is right. We are talking about two movies on today's episode. We will be discussing the new, maybe a small film you've never heard of. It's called Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, as well as another film called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. One of these movies is my favorite film of 2022 so far. The other film has Doctor Strange. You'll have to find out which is which on today's episode. But so we will be discussing both films, kind of spoilery. So if you haven't seen them, you should go and watch them kind of beforehand and then maybe come back. We're going to start with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which was released in theaters on May 6th, 2022, and may still be in some theaters, though it's also available now on Disney Plus. So that's a way to watch it if you haven't. And this is I believe the 28th film in the MCU, which is kind of mind-boggling. I mean, this all
really
started.
hard.
I know it started in 2008. I mean, we're up to 28 films, and this isn't even including all of the Disney Plus shows. Just like lots of MCU in our life. And it's directed by Sam Raimi, who we may know from the Spider-Man movies as well as the Evil Dead movies. He's kind
And
of
Xena.
and Xena. Don't forget Xena. So it's interesting to see him kind of come into this movie because this was sort of being advertised as like the first kind of quote unquote horror movie in the MCU, and obviously Sam Raimi has both background in that with like Evil Dead and Darkman, as well as obviously superhero stuff with Spider-Man. So kind of interesting to see him kind of come onto this. But yeah, so we're gonna again discuss these movies.
Didn't the last Spider-Man also play into the multiverse? We have all three Spider-Men.
It did, yes, with
So,
No Way
I
Home.
consider that sort of same kind of theme. The alternate worlds, the multiverse.
Right. Well, and this movie is very much sort of taking place right after that film, because in that movie we had Doctor Strange and obviously the whole kind of opening up the multiverse. So in many ways, this movie is sort of dealing with the ramifications of that. But again, we're going to be going kind of full spoilers into this. So if you haven't seen it, come back after you've watched it. But so we'll go around and I guess kind of give kind of initial impressions, and then we can kind of really dive into it. But let's start with you, Dad. What did you think of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness?
Well, I would sort of summarize it by saying it was not enough substance and more just a lot of effects. I was disappointed in it. I think the whole idea of Doctor Strange is interesting, but with Sam Raimi, I never quite know whether he's kidding us or not. How seriously to take whatever you're seeing, because it gets flipped over, and of course, huge spoiler alert at the end. We think we're seeing one Doctor Strange when we really should think we're seeing another Doctor Strange, because the eye and the forehead theme. So I find it enjoyable, with all the effects and so forth. But I just didn't feel there was that much substance to it, and I never could get that excited, because I always kind of think, this would be kind of, I guess, a criticism of Sam Raimi, going back to the Evil Dead 2, where he keeps kind of he has his own multiverses. All of a sudden, you think you're seeing one thing and you end up seeing something else again, and it's hard to know what you're seeing is real or what is not. And I felt that was, to me, the film seemed disjointed. Again, a lot of effects. I like Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, but it was enjoyable, but not memorable. How about that?
Alrighty then, Gwen, what did you think of Doctor Strange?
I feel like I'm gonna have the unpopular opinion, because I kind of really liked it a lot. I agree it's not a great movie, but I liked, once it went full Sam Raimi, I was like so on board. I loved how weird and bizarre it was. I loved that characters were just straight up dying. I agree that the plot was not good, and I really feel like everything with Doctor Strange was pretty boring. But with Wanda, I feel like if you didn't have WandaVision, this wouldn't be so great. But I don't know. The whole Wanda soaked in blood, Carrie crazy, chasing them like full on horror, I really liked. And I really liked him harnessing his dead body and like flying with like demon bats to like fight. It just was like full Evil Dead in a way that I really liked. And I like it. I'm gonna watch it again. I don't know why, but I like it a lot.
I think I'm probably somewhere between the two of you. I think for me, I thought this was a really good Sam Raimi movie and a very okay MCU movie. I think when it has to have those kind of obligatory like callbacks and setups for new kind of projects, it feels a little bit bogged down. But I agree with you, Gwen. I feel like by the time we get to the third act, it does go full Evil Dead Sam Raimi, which I was kind of on board with. And Dad, I hate to say it, but I am an Evil Dead 2 truther, so I will stand up on that hill. I love Evil Dead 2, and I agree. Even those movies have a very kind of campy quality to them, and I think that comes true in this movie as well. But I think my problem is for this being called the Multiverse of Madness. To me, there wasn't much multiverse or much madness, and we get that kind of moment where they're going through all the different multiverses, and we see like the paint world and like the slime world, and those to me seem so much more cool and creative and interesting. And then we end up in this like fake New York where it's like, oh, we have pizza rolls and that's the difference. And you're like,
I
really?
agree.
That's the best we could do? And we obviously get our obligatory Bruce Campbell cameo, which I was more than happy with. But it's kind of like for how weird Doctor Strange could get, I feel like it didn't get that weird.
I agree. And they really
That
threw
is
away
fair.
Chavez. Like they threw away her character. She was like totally wasted in this movie.
Well, between both her and even, obviously Wanda, and again, we can kind of even discuss like WandaVision a bit and how this sort of like, takes place after that. But it felt like it was, I agree, Gwen, there's a lot of kind of like Carrie and like horror elements to when she becomes like the full-on villain, but also reminded me a bit of like Terminator 2, especially with America's character being like the kind of like John Connor. We have to protect them because they're a special, they have all these special qualities, and then
Yeah.
she almost becomes this like T2, yeah,
Yeah,
like
but
coming after you.
her whole element felt so flat. I feel like they could have done so much more with her.
I agree.
Like she felt like such a throwaway character when like there was so much hype when we found out she was going to be in this movie. And like, yeah, I agree, definitely that Terminator 2 vibe, but you don't care about her or even like relate with her. And it's nothing against the actress or her. I loved her, but like I just feel like they really missed the mark with what they could have done with her. Like she just felt blah.
She's a plot device, like literally.
Literally. Literally.
And again, it's one of these like plot devices where it's like, okay, you have X amount of abilities, which is literally just there to forward the plot, but otherwise you're just the sort of like person we have to keep safe.
Yes.
Okay, and then we can obviously talk about there's a lot of big cameos. We have the scene with the Illuminati where they're in this world where we get Patrick Stewart reprising his role as Professor X. We get John Krasinski as Reed Richards, which was like a heavily kind of rumored, speculated casting. But what's even weird about this, and then we get all these moments, and then they're all immediately kind of killed off, which was also kind of like, okay, I guess we're going there. But what's kind of weird too is like because this is supposed to be an alternate universe, we don't actually know if these are going to be the official. Like we don't know if John Krasinski is officially going to be in Fantastic Four, and even like the way they're sort of talking about it feels very much like kind of playing coy. So again, it's kind of like one of these things. I'm like, cool, we had these moments, but like, what does this actually mean? And are we actually like, for example, are we actually getting um, Patrick Stewart officially back, or is this just like a one more kind of cameo? And also, it's like I hate to say it, but as someone who's grown up with all the X-Men movies, how many times do we have to see not just Charles Xavier, but Patrick Stewart, Charles Xavier die? It's like one too many times now, right? It's playing with my emotions, and I've had enough of it.
Yeah, again, this was my problem with it. That you line up in a certain way, and then you feel like Sam Raimi pulls the carpet from underneath your feet, and you're back into some other bizarre kind of scenario. This thing reminded me of the Twilight Zone classic, Eye of the Beholder, which it really is an alternate universe where the handsome people are ugly and vice versa. The whole idea that what you're seeing is not what's really there. I think that's That's kind of what I was left with. And at the end, then okay, now this is the Doctor Strange with the third eye, so it's not the Doctor Strange we thought was coming out. It's a different Doctor Strange. It just
No, I
so
think
say,
I think it was the Doctor Strange we knew. He just gained the third eye. That's how I took it.
well, yeah, but I think it's right, but you're not sure. I think that's to me that's Sam Raimi. I think he when he did the Spider-Man movies, that kind of sort of kind of like trickery almost worked. But I felt here now I felt he saying, okay, no, this is not the world you thought it was. It's another it's another multiverse. That's what I took it as.
Okay.
Well, and then did you guys see the post-credit scene with Charlize Theron?
Yes.
I had no idea who she was, and so I was kind of like, okay, this is something. And
I know. I also was kind of like, really, like, I mean, okay, I get it. Like, a lot of big actors are coming in, but I'm kind of sick of seeing really well-known actors like Angelina Jolie and stuff like now join the Marvel universe. I don't know. I'd rather see new blood. But
yeah,
but to go back to the cameos, I loved the cameos, and yes, it was like here they are, and they're like gone so quickly. And I would love nothing more than to see an Agent Carter, Captain America, like its own spin-off because I love her. But I felt like Sam Raimi was kind of like, okay, here's all these cameos everyone wanted to see and we're highly anticipating, but I'm gonna make this all about Wanda. And I feel like she's never really gotten credit. She's always been this D character in all of the storylines, and only because of WandaVision do I feel like it's able to be carried for her in this movie, because I do feel like the plot is very weak in this movie. But I kind of loved, here's WandaVision, full blown powers, full blown everything, and she just cooks everybody within seconds because that's actually how powerful she is. And she's just been like being the good guy. And I just love this idea that all the other male characters can break the rules here and there in all of the different movies, but as soon as Wanda breaks it, oh, she's the villain. And I loved that, and I loved her, and so I love that he gave it as like her moment. This is her moment for you to see really how fully like supersonic she is, and I liked that a lot.
I had one of my talking about cameos. The minute we had Reed Richards, I'm thinking, well, where's the rest of the Fantastic Four? We're going to see them.
Yeah.
That's where my mind went. Yeah, okay, hey, Reed Richards. Wow. What, where's Sue? Where's the Thing?
I feel like it was just a plug to say, hey, now we have Fantastic Four and X-Men, and this is our little segue introduction of like their own movies coming into the Marvel universe, apart from all the previous ones.
yeah, and I agree, Gwen. I feel like that was the moment to kind of really show Wanda's full potential. But in terms of the other cameos, that to me kind of maybe also highlights some of my issues where I think the whole movie you can kind of feel that push and pull between this being a Sam Raimi film and being an MCU film. And I think one of the criticisms that I think is very kind of fair against the Marvel movies is that they don't really let kind of directors really do their thing. It's very, kind of keeping in line with the sort of uniformity of these movies. And like obviously a very infamous story is when Edgar Wright was supposed to direct Ant-Man and then got fired due to creative differences. And basically he was like, listen, they didn't want an Edgar Wright movie. They wanted an MCU movie. And like, that's not my thing. I have my own kind of trademark style. And with this, I mean, I think there are enough kind of Sam Raimi isms throughout. But again, I almost feel like with handling the cameos, with handling some of the other kind of like world building, you feel it almost like feel a bit maybe obligatory to Sam Raimi in terms of like what he actually wants to do with these movies. Whereas even in contrast to the Spider-Man movies, which you could say that's a very kind of different era where before we were doing all these kind of cinematic universes, like I still feel like those movies by and by were Sam Raimi movies. Like he got to just make the movies he wanted to make, and
Yeah.
you could argue that
Mhm.
whether that was good or bad, but like they felt like true Sam Raimi movies, whereas this feels like Sam Raimi working in a system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to me, again, the whole thing was I would sum it up as style over substance. And I
Yeah.
think that fits into what you're saying. I mean, Sam Raimi has a trademark. You're right, and I agree that he's not quite given full reign, but I just think he's in some ways I think he's fighting with the material, and you're right. How many times are we going to have? Is the Professor Xavier? Is he really now going to be a key figure, or is he just a blip? He's here for a scene and then he's gone.
Hmm. Okay, so James, just we're at 15 minutes if we want to segue into Everything Everywhere.
Oh, sure. Well, and on
Yeah.
that, I will say that so I actually saw Everything Everywhere All at Once first because it was released on March 25th, 2022. And even with that, which again is a full multiverse movie, I feel like having watched that and then watching Doctor Strange, I was like, that movie handles the idea of a multiverse in such a more exciting and interesting and thought-provoking way that again, for this to be Doctor Strange and all the sort of like potential you could have with that, it felt a little kind of underwhelming. But I agree, Gwen. Now is the time to go into Everything Everywhere All at Once, which
Yeah,
is
so actually to piggyback off of that, it was the flip for me where you had been telling me for months to see Everything Everywhere All at Once. And finally we watched Doctor Strange because it just came out on Disney Plus, and then literally the next day we watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. So to watch Doctor Strange and then to watch that, like in the flip, I was like, wow, this is such a better movie with like the same plot idea.
absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, I think it had like a limited release on March 25th, and then maybe got kind of like a wider release. And I believe now it's available to rent on demand, so you can watch it that way. But it also might be in theaters. But so yeah, this is an A24 film. It's directed by Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, who are referred to as the Daniels. They did Swiss Army Man a couple years ago, so they have a very kind of unique and creative, I think, style. But again, I think again we're gonna go full spoilers for this. So again, let's go around and get initial impressions, and then we kind of dive right into it. So I'll start with you, Gwen. What did you think of Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I also loved this. I thought this movie was, like you said, it's got to be the best movie of the year. Conceptually phenomenal. All of the performances phenomenal. Amazing. It was so well done. And when you think about cutting through like 20 different scenes in a matter of like 5 minutes, you would think that's too chaotic, that's too weird, we're not going to get the flow. And it just was so opposite that. It was great. Great action, great acting, great fighting scenes, great conceptual, the imagery, the costumes. I loved all of it.
Okay, Dad, what did you think of
Yeah,
Everything Everywhere All at
I
Once?
liked it very much. And it really, I thought, brought up to speed a redeemer hero moving in the emphasis of even a savior. The whole discussion about being kind, kindness, and even about love could in a lesser effort could be just, oh, that's just a cliche. Be kind, be nice to people and so forth. But it shows that being kind is really hard. Right? And I thought one thing they did very well was you're all over the place, but they kept grounding you in that initial scene in the IRS. You kept coming back to that, so you had like a firm point of reference. And I thought that was very well done. I thought some of it, the whole idea of a bagel, in capturing all of reality, and I love the idea of having what happens when your fingers become hot dogs.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, talk about making the threat, a tax audit. I mean, what could be scarier, right? Um, but yeah, so obviously, if you couldn't tell, yes, Everything Everywhere All at Once is my current favorite movie of the year, and I feel like by the end of the year, it's still going to be just because of how original and ambitious it is. And yeah, going off of what both you said, I think it's so much fun and has so many I think film references that for people like us who watch so many movies, it references everything from like The Matrix to Wong Kar Wai to obviously Pixar to Jackie Chan and even just kind of like Hong Kong action cinema in general. And I agree with kind of what you said, Gwen, where I find like, even though it's so kind of like jumping around and kind of all over the place, it's never convoluted or incomprehensible. And you're right, Dad, you're always kind of like going back to like that initial like tax audit as like this sort of like frame of reference. But what I like about this too, in terms of being like a multiverse movie, is like obviously we're seeing kind of all these different multiverses and they all kind of come into play. but I like that it really dives into this idea of like the what if, and kind of like I think that's something that's so universal and relatable of like kind of like what if your life went this way or that way, and kind of like thinking about your life and kind of like the idea that everyone makes a choice, and every choice leads to a decision which leads to an outcome, and kind of like showing all the different ways your life can sort of go. And for this to kind of like not just explore that in a fun creative way with like the action scenes, but kind of like how um Evelyn, played by Michelle Yeoh, is sort of like thinking about like where her life could have gone, and what if she had made these other decisions, and for it to all kind of like sweep together into this ultimately this not just mother daughter sort of story, but also just her kind of like coming to acceptance with like the way her life is, and actually how her life actually is in some ways the best possible version that it could be. And yeah, obviously it has a lot of these kind of idiosyncrasies. It has hot dog hands. It's very, in some ways it has a lot of juvenile humor, but it also has this kind of beating sentimental heart. And even Dad, I want to hear kind of what you think, but I feel like for the movie to kind of like flirt with all this kind of like nihilism about like, is there any meaning to any of this, for it to ultimately pay off in this big kind of like grandiose sort of, you could say sentimental sort of like ending, I thought it all kind of came together very well.
Yeah, I would agree. It's there's a famous novel, The Bridge Over San Luis Rey, which was made into a not very good movie years ago. But the point of that was that that story was there's this bridge, in South America, and at one point the bridge gives way when there's 5 people on the bridge, and they all die, of course. And there's this priest who's trying to see if he can make some sense out of this. Why those 5? Why this time? And he starts studying the lives of each one of the 5, and realizes that their deaths at that time in that place made sense. And I thought some of that's going on here. The meaning is not given to you, but meaning can be captured by you. I kind of got that idea. That this that and you can be kind, right? I also think that the heroine, though, the protagonist, is is kind of the classic redeemer hero, and fighting a way through in a way that Doctor Strange was not. You want to go backtrack to that? So I thought it was really very good, and the idea of the stones talking to each other and the kind of desert scene, it was. I mean, I was surprised at how funny it was. Right? I wasn't expecting that.
I laughed a lot during this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's got some great comic bits, but they're not just throwaways. They're there to kind of bridge out the point. And I think that to really affirm something like kindness or even love, you have to realize that the alternative is nihilism. Uh, and I love the idea that nihilism is summarized by a giant bagel. Right? That's just you know. But I was laughing out
It was.
loud with the characters trying to use their fingers when they're hot dogs. Right?
I know.
Oh,
Well, there's so much. I mean, obviously, the whole Rak Kankui bit kept going and kept getting funnier to the point where she's literally on the guy's head controlling him. I was like hysterically laughing. But there's so
yeah.
much like physical comedy. Like I think with her husband, played by K1 Kwan, who we all know from like Temple of Doom and The Goonies, and this being his first role in like 20 years, I thought he was incredible. But his first fight scene with like the fanny pack was incredible. And then like so many of just like the bits where he's like trying to get like the paper cut on his fingers, like all of these like little like kind of like very idiosyncratic but very like physical kind of like humor just to me really worked.
But there's a great theme of that. The Robert Frost, the road less traveled. Right? You say the what if, and that even there with the whole question of it's their anniversary, they're going to get divorced, but their married life could have been different than it was. And again, that idea of life is full of choices, and you don't know where they're all going to end up. But I thought the idea of a laundromat made a lot of sense because it's a public place where people are strangers come together, but there is a kind of intimacy there because what are they doing? They're washing their underwear, midst of strangeness, of not knowing people, but
Well,
the people are there to be known.
and this is such a like, obviously a Chinese kind of immigrant story and a very generational story. The way we see that her daughter, Joy, has a girlfriend, and then like we see her father, who's way more kind of conservative, and obviously she's trying to kind of like hide from him the fact that her daughter has a girlfriend, and then in the midst of like having this whole audit going on, her husband is leaving her, and it's kind of she's almost not even processing everything that's going on. But I thought a great emotional beat is when we cut to the one again other verse, which again is very like Wong Kar-wai, In the Mood for Love, but her and her husband, where he's talking about how in another life I would have loved to do laundry and taxes with you, and like you're breaking my heart for the second time, and like things like that I thought really just like hit home. And again, thinking about like how your life could have been, and as you said, that like the kind of Robert Frost poem, but like how maybe the grass is always greener idea maybe doesn't always ring true.
But it's even so in the case where you're not thinking about something vastly different. You talk about you could have owned a chain of laundromats and so forth, but in a different way. I thought that was a touching point.
Right. It's not always dramatic
the
differences.
same could be different, and I think a lot of times when we think of these alternative ideas, it's the idea of something totally different. But it wouldn't have to be totally different. It could still be quite different, even though it's within the same pattern, the same kind of trajectory of decisions made. The same marriage could be different. That makes sense?
Right. It's all kind of like little changes that could kind of trickle down, of course.
Yeah, but that could in the end result could make a major difference.
Yeah.
And I think everybody faces that question of what I can say the what if. What if I had moved here or moved there? Or if I'd taken this job or that job, or anyway, had a relationship, married this person or that other person or whatever. Those are all in there, and to me, it's both threatening and comic, which is really a hard line to maintain. It could be because it could be very bleak, being as nihilistic as it is, but the nihilism never overtakes the whole story. And you really are dealing with a concrete issue of the bank audit, the tax audit rather, that and your taxes are overdue. You keep coming back to that. That's a fundamental reality that doesn't disappear.
Absolutely. And I watched a featurette because I'm a nerd about this movie with the Daniels, and obviously they're huge kind of like movie fans. I think that's pretty obvious. And again, they talked about how they wanted to make a story that was very inspired by movies they love, including The Matrix, Fight Club, etc. And apparently originally they considered Jackie Chan for the lead, but then decided they wanted a female protagonist, which I actually think, as much as I love Jackie Chan, I think Michelle Yeoh is awesome. And obviously, she's no stranger to action movies. She's in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Kills it.
She kills it. Yeah, she's even recently in like Shang-Chi. But I think what's so funny and cool is that they said in this featurette that they wanted to make a movie kind of like the ones they've grown up loving, but to almost imagine one of their parents as the lead, and kind of what would that look like, and not just that, but like having your parent be kind of thrown into this kind of world, and which in many ways Evelyn is sort of thrown into this, and what does that look like? And I thought that was such a sort of like interesting and kind of brilliant idea at approaching this type of movie, and a lot of fun.
I absolutely love the part where she like first sees her life as a movie star, and then she comes back and she says to her husband like, "I just saw my life without you and it was wonderful." He's
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah, right. And he's more thinking of it. Well, it could have been the same, only different.
Well, and every time he kind of goes back and forth between being like the husband to being like the other one, where he'll like lower his glass, like, "It's me now. Actually, you're gonna do this and that." Like the way he would do
right.
that was so funny, I thought.
yeah, he was fantastic. His acting was incredible.
I know. And again, his first role in like 20 years, and he doesn't even have that huge of a filmography. Again, like we know him from Short Round and Temple of Doom and The Goonies, but he hasn't been in that many movies. But for him to kind of like, in effect, come out of retirement every once in a while to be in roles like this,
Being
I'm all
awesome.
for.
Yeah.
Like I said, the part with the fanny pack, I just was
Oh, it
done.
was fantastic. And Jamie Lee Curtis was just so hilarious. Like, it's so funny to see her in a role like that.
I know, yeah. Which again, what could
Yeah.
be scarier than a tax audit? But then to have her go even more crazy.
Yeah, right.
And even the way they show kind of like the way, they sort of channel different skills. Like when we see the other multiverse where she's like flipping the sign around and how that becomes like the weapon in this universe. I thought it was just very clever. And the way we're like cut back and forth, again, it never became incomprehensible. It all kind of flowed very well.
That there's to me still a theological point that the idea that you require sacrifice to achieve kindness or mercy, which is very much a Christian concept. Christ has to sacrifice himself because he's creating an alternate world. But it's very challenging and it's very demanding, and that's what I think kept it from becoming a little banal when they talk. Well, we should show kindness. Well, when you realize and show kindness to like the Jamie Lee Curtis character, people who ostensibly don't deserve kindness, but you need to show it to them anyway. I mean, that's getting into an idea of suffering love. That love and kindness are not something that are easily shown. There's a cost to showing them. It's difficult to show them. But what the alternative is, the world ends up inside of a bagel.
True. Well, what I like too with having her daughter Joy kind of be the sort of like antagonist of the story is that even just going back to like the Evelyn and Joy kind of relationship, it's as simple as just the fact that like the two of them just don't see eye to eye and are kind of just don't kind of understand each other, and that's where the sort of like conflict sort of like arises out of. It's not so much that they're at complete odds with one another, it's just that they're not fully in sync with one another and just don't kind of get each other, and which I think can be a very relatable kind of idea. Okay, do we want to have any maybe kind of closing remarks about Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Go see it.
This is currently the highest grossing A24 movie, which I think is very exciting and also makes sense because a lot of A24 films, are very kind of lower budget, very creative filmmaker driven movies. And I think this movie, I don't know the exact budget, but like this feels like the closest thing they'll get to a quote unquote blockbuster. But what I like about this movie is like I think this movie is very much benefiting from word of mouth. And I think people that
Yes.
are going around just telling people to see it, and like you're seeing it have those legs, and that's always exciting for a movie like this to get.
I agree. My coworkers, multiple people recommended that I see this film. So I definitely think the word of mouth is a huge factor in this movie.
Another great factor it picks up is the idea of daydreams becoming reality. You get something as basic as the Wizard of Oz. Is Oz an alternate world, or is Oz just part of a daydream? It's extended.
And it's all about this idea of like what your life could have been and how much better or not that actually would be.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well I think we kind of gave enough to say about both of these multiverse movies. So in closing, I would say Everything Everywhere All at Once, I would definitely recommend. Doctor Strange, I'd recommend if you're a big MCU person or if you're, I guess, into kind of like Evil Dead type horror. Otherwise, I think it's not one you need to rush, personally.
Yeah, I think we've covered it. I mean, Doctor Strange, is enjoyable if you're a big Marvel, I just say a Marvel fan. But Everything Everywhere All at Once is a challenging movie, and but an enjoyable one too.
Absolutely. Okay, well I think that wraps up today's episode of 10 Times the Terror. Again, I'm James.
I'm Paul.
And I'm Gwen.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror.
the podcast.
One of my favorite films ever. Let's do that for again. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.